Shalom, everyone. Glad to see you came again on a Wednesday night. Before we get started, I want to let you know, I don't know if you keep track of history or you're a history buff, but on this date in 475 CE of the Common Era, the Babylonian Talmud was completed. Rabbi Ashi would later die in 427, and Rabbi Ravina I, who died in 421, they led the groups as they were going through this process of creating the Talmud. Now, the Talmud, again, is an extension or an expansion of all of the stories and all the lines that have been told by the Amorim, which are the commentators of the first, second, third, fourth century. And so it was finally finished. And so we put together in the Gematria and the Mishnah, were put together into what we call the Talmud today. So today is the day in which it was actually completed. But can you imagine doing this all by hand? There's 64 volumes on the shelf behind me. All of it was done by two men by hand, taking scraps of paper from everywhere or parchment and putting them together into what we would call today a book. And so there are 64 little books there, but that would make up the Talmud. By the way, I want us to start out by, can you find in your Bible the book of Obadiah? Obadiah. Obadiah is the Haftorah reading for tonight. And the reason I bring up this Haftorah reading is because I'm not going to spend much time talking about the fight between Jacob and Esau. I want to deal with the periphery, the things that are around it. And so in the book called Obadiah, which you find just after the book of Amos in the scriptures, I want us to look at one verse, and that's the 18th verse, if you will. To find it, it begins by saying as
Steve,
follows. Yes.
where's it at in the art scroll? I can't find it.
Oh, you want a page number?
Please.
All right. 1371.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Makes it easier if you have the same Bible that I do. But anyway, so it's Obadiah chapter 1, because there is only one chapter, and it's the 18th verse in that chapter. And it begins with, the house of Jacob will be fire, the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau for straw, and they will ignite them and devour them. There will be no survivor to the house of Esau, for Hashem has spoken. Now, this is the verse that the rabbis say caused them to use this particular book as the Haftorah reading for this particular parsha. Now, right now, it may not make sense why they chose this particular chapter and why I chose this particular verse to highlight, but hopefully as we go along, it'll begin to come a little bit clearer to you. But this verse speaks of a sense of night, and the night is yet to come. This book, Obadiah, deals with what we would call the end of days. And at the end of days, it deals with Edom. So that's our point of jumping off. Now I want to go back to the book of Genesis, and I want to go back to Vayishlach. Now, I talked about this last time meaning last year, when we looked at this particular section. I wanted you to recognize the idea of shlach. Now, in this particular parsha, it said, then Jacob sent angels, then Jacob shlach. Or actually what it really says is they sent. So Jacob sends, and so the word shlach means to send. Now the word shlach is used in two other parshas. One is called Beshlach, which is in the book of Exodus. And that's when the Pharaoh sends out the Israelites. Then there's the parsha called Shlach, which is in the book of Numbers. And that's the parsha in which Moses sends out the 12 spies. So Shlach was a very significant word. And so I highlighted it in the fact that it was in 3 different places that you're going to find it. Now, from the beginning of this parsha, we're going to find there's going to be trouble on the horizon. This is only the beginning of that problem. The problem will not end here. In fact, as Obadiah says, the problem will end at the Mount of Seir. That's where the problem is going to end. And so as we begin to look at this, it says, so shall you say to my master Esau. Thus said, so I'm going through the wording right here. Thus said your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban, and I have tarried until now, and I have acquired oxen and donkeys and flocks and manservants and maidservants, and I have sent to tell this to my master and to find favor in your eyes. Now, this verse indicates that he had come away from Laban quite wealthy. But then the Hazal, which were the ancient sages, the ones of blessed memory. In fact, that's what the word Hazal means. It's an anagram, is to talk about the blessed ones. And those were the Hazal. Well, in sending them away, he sends angels to Laban, or to Esau. And as the sages read this, they come to the conclusion that he creates for himself no end of trouble. And so you have to go back and try to figure out what is it that they're really talking about. Why in the earth did Jacob send messengers to Esau? What was he hoping to gain? What was he trying to prove? Well, this whole thing is probably more about the fact of prophetic announcement that is highly hidden, not easily seen. And so we're going to try, or I'm going to try, to give you some understandings of where it's at. Now in the Zohar, in Bereshit 189a, it says, we are told Esau was as afraid of Jacob as Jacob was of Esau. Quite a statement. Because we saw nowhere in the text where that would be true. What hints do they have? And are we talking about the same Esau? Or are we talking about future? Rashi believed that as soon as Laban had departed from Jacob, remember they were had the covenant or the treaty to determine you can't go any further than this south and I won't go any further than this north. That treaty that was assigned between the two of them, and Laban went home and Jacob continued south. Well, according to Rashi, there's a midrash which says that Laban sent his son, Beor, down to Esau to tell Esau that Jacob was on his way home. But he did more than that. According to the midrash, it says, now would you be the right time for you to take revenge for the injustice Jacob had done to you, and to take away all the Jacob's possessions. So Laban had told Esau then, this would be a great time for you to take from Jacob, since you didn't the first time, because remember, he sent his son Eliphaz to take Jacob out 20 some years ago. And Eliphaz instead just simply took his wealth. And by taking his wealth, it was understood that he was as good as dead. Well, now he's returning again, and now he is wealthy again. And so Laban suggests that maybe now is the time for you to recapture some more wealth and put your brother out. And so that was the story that he had. But there were so many other stories trying to identify why Jacob would possibly want to let Esau know that he was coming back. There's a Rabbi Abba who believed that while the father was still alive, Jacob was interested in coming home, and he believed that Isaac would save him or keep him from being killed. But he also was worried because his father was old, but yet he decided he would come, and he decided it's better me to tell him now than to wait till later. Jacob's message, remember, is very specific. Very specific. He wants to make sure in those verses that I just read, and I'll read them again. So shall you say to my master, to Esau. Notice what he calls Esau. He calls him his master, Adonai. Thus said your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban, and I have tarried until now. I have acquired. Do you keep hearing the word I? That's the word that the Hazal are struggling with. What is he doing? Is he putting himself up? And if he is, why did he call Esau his Adonai, his master? He says he has many oxen and he has many donkeys, flocks, maidservants, men servants, and he tells him all that he has so that he might find favor in his eyes. Now remember, it was Jacob who had taken the blessing. It was Jacob who had taken the birthright. Now, if he really had both of those things, why on earth is he referring to his brother in such a manner? What's going on? Rabbi Yehuda, in the book of Sanhedrin 105a, says, what is Jacob's intention by sending messengers to inform Esau that he had been living with Laban? The text goes on to answer the question by noting Laban's infamous reputation had spread far and wide. Laban was known in those days as the greatest sorcerer who ever lived. The greatest. Now remember his family lineage. When he dies, his son Beor will take over. And according to the book of Joshua, Beor is the greatest sorcerer. And after that, we know Beor's son was Balaam. And we all know what happens in the book of Numbers as they talk about him. So this is a great sorcerer. Now, according to Sanhedrin 105a, he continues to go on to say that no one escaped from Laban. So when Jacob flees, which is what he did, left in the middle of the night while Laban was gone, he flees to where he's at, but Laban catches him. Now, Laban doesn't put a spell on him or anything else. He simply, at that particular point in time, separates himself. And then the question becomes, why? Well, the answer that the sages had was very simple. Just like Daniel, just like Joseph, who had been spending years in the house of, to lack a better term, darkness, he had learned Laban's secrets, just as Daniel had learned those of the Babylonians and Joseph had learned that of the Egyptians. He knew, and thereby knowing, he created for himself a place. Now, the story doesn't really end there. There's a verse in Deuteronomy 26:5. And can you turn to 26:5 for a second? Deuteronomy. It's still in my Bible. 26:5. Then you shall call out and say, before Hashem your God, an Aramean tried to destroy my forefather, Jacob. Who was the Aramean that tried to destroy Jacob? According to the sages, that was Laban. Laban had tried to destroy him. Now the comment is put in this particular place, again, for us to stumble across and begin to understand something a little bit more. So Laban was the one who was an Aramean. Balaam was also an Aramean. That territory where they were at had a cave that was said to house the two angels that lost their glory when they attempted to teach the women down here and the men the right way, and found themselves in the middle of all kinds of disgusting things. Balaam and Laban used to go visit these angels in their caves. And so they learned dark, dark secrets at that point in time. When I was in South Bend at the University of Notre Dame, on the top floor is their historical collection. One of the books in their historical collection, according to the librarian who was going to our church at that time, was the Black Arts of Moses. In other words, it was a book that had been created in the days of Moses, in which all of the incantations, all of the ceremonies on the dark side could be found and were written into that book. Well, just as easily, Laban could have written his own book. Now, everything that Balaam knew, he learned from Laban. And Balaam, you remember, according to Balak, said, whomever you bless will be blessed, and whomever you curse will be cursed. And it seems that that same power was attributed to Laban. Now, all the commentators agree that this is no simple message. It's rhetoric, and that it was aimed to affect Esau both on a physical level, an emotional level, a mental level, and a spiritual level. Jacob was attempting to get into his mind, to change it from the possibility that he was coming there to destroy him. The choice of words then are going to become very important, and I'm going to get into the choice of words in a second. But one thing we have to know is, and we should know, we can learn just about everything we need to know from everyone who's around us, good or bad. Now, from those who are evil, we would learn what not to do. From those who are good, we would learn what to do. In the book Avot, in the Jerusalem Talmud, Avot 4:1, who is wise? He who learns from every person. So Jacob had learned. He had learned psychology. He had learned all of the things that Laban would use. Therefore, Laban had no control over him. So how could Jacob know that the knowledge gained from dwelling with Laban could be used to save his own life or to save it from his brother? Perhaps through a prophecy. And that is a hint that's going to be found in our story. Now, by learning from the dark side intimately, Jacob knew how to recognize the strengths and the weaknesses of others. Now, it seems like it would be easier for us to do that, but it's actually easier from the evil side because they see the hints. They see the expressions. They see all of the things that we don't see. But on top of that, one of the things that he saw that he chose not to do was to assimilate. After 20 years of being with Laban, Jacob did not assimilate. He did not become a part of that culture. He chose to set himself away from it. He chose to put himself in a position where he learned, but he kept it separate. Now, the same thing happens to me, to you. There was one point in time when many of us found ourselves in the church because we thought that the church was the way to God and that Jesus was God in some form. When in reality, the more we looked at things, what happened? The more we saw that there was more truth in the Torah than what we were seeing in the New Testament. Here I am 70 plus years old, and I'm still finding myself grateful for those last 14 or 15 years when I could separate myself out from that which was getting me nowhere. Now, in our story, in verse 32:5, I want you to look at 32:5 because it becomes important. Now he charged them, saying, "Thus shall you say to my Lord, to Adonai, to Esau, so said your servant Jacob." Here's the key. I have sojourned. I have sojourned. Now the word for sojourn in Hebrew is garti. Garti. You'd spell it Garti. And in Hebrew, it'd be Gimel, Resh, Tav, Yun. Now I say that because of the fact, what is it about sojourning? What did he mean by that? Well, the rabbis and the sages would tell you that what he's doing was a number. You see, Garti, Gimel is 3, Resh is 200, Tav is 400, and Yud is 10. Total 613. I have sojourned. How? I know the Torah. I know the Torah. Now the question is, what does he mean by I know the Torah? Torah wasn't going to be given for another several hundred years. Did he know all the Torah? And then the question comes, well, if he knew all the Torah, why on earth did he marry 2 sisters? In the book of Leviticus, the 18th chapter, the 18th verse says that no one should marry 2 sisters. Now, it doesn't give an explanation why there, but I can imagine that's something that we could easily see. How does one get along with 2 women at the same time? The idea is there's a real problem, but when there's even more greater problem when it's 2 sisters. Now he goes through this idea of studying. In that same verse, the last few words of that verse have lingered until now. Have lingered until now. Jacob was telling Esau, if you will say, since I have kept the commandments, you should feel my self-confidence. I am confident in what I've learned. There's nothing that you can do. Now, the last word in that sentence is the word atah. Aleph, well, actually, it's not Aleph, it's Ein. It should have been Aleph, but he used the letter Ein. Again, a spelling error. No, it's purposeful. The word is Ein. The letter is, what am I thinking? What's the next letter? Got to go back. Atah, Tav, and Hey. 3 letters. Ein has a value of 70. Jacob was telling him, I know that there will be a period of 70. He may not have expressed it explicitly, but 70 was the Babylonian captivity. Tav is 400. Now it does speak to 400 men coming here, but 400 also speaks of the prophecy given to Abraham, that there will be a 400-year exile. Then we have the letter 5. Hey. The rabbis say that what we're doing is we're looking closer to the end of days. There will be 5 millennium, and the 6th will be called the age of the Mashiach. 1996. A good year for wine, maybe, I don't know. 1996. That was the first year that we began to talk about the end of the century and the computer problems that we were going to have. Do you remember those? The computers weren't going to be able to go into the year 2000. Now, the rabbis had gone to a very interesting place when they were thinking about this. They went to this chapter. And they went exactly to the location where Jacob found himself as he was sending out the messengers. When he received Esau, the place is called Yabak. Now, Yabak is 3 letters: Yud, Bet, Kaf. Now, one of the things that they did was they transposed it into English. Yud, Bet is 2, Kaf is K. Why 2K? They understood that things were going to change at that point in time. In fact, Rabbi Schneerson created 4 different, should I call them lessons or teachings, dealing with how life would change at that point in time. He began to talk about technology. The changes in technology would lead to what we would call tikkun. In fact, he made a comment that tikkun is the very same word as the word techne, which is the Greek word for technology. That as techne became more and more prevalent, we would be finding ourselves coming closer and closer to the end. Now, Ramban taught that Jacob showed respect for his brother by fearfully saying, "My Lord and your servant." Now, it was customary at that time that a younger brother would always say to his older brother, call his older brother as though he were his father. And so Adonai would have been acceptable, and maybe servant would have been acceptable. Well, Or Hahaim looked at that same phrase and he noticed he commanded them to say, La Amer. Why did he use the Torah used, or why did the Torah use the word to say, since Jacob had already said to the messengers, just tell him this? There's something that was necessary for him to see in the exact language. Now, as he goes through this, he talks about the fact that there, at this point, jealousy was still prevalent on this case, but he was not done. The Lubavitcher Rebbe wrote the following: between the giving of the Torah and the final redemption, we need to carry out 2 types of spiritual elevation. The elevation of the objects found in the physical world by using them for holy purposes and in doing of mitzvahs, and by dedicating non-religious acts for the sake of heaven. Now, the second thing he said was the elevation of the non-Jewish nations, leading to the point where I will convert the people to a pure language. And this is coming from Zephaniah 3:9. I will convert the people to a pure language, that all of them call in the name of God to worship of him, the one accord. Now, these 2 were apparent in the life of Jacob. While the house of Laban, he observed all 613 commandments, as Rashi above had said, but did he? And then he goes through with the story of the twin sisters and Leviticus. According to Rabbi Schneerson, it was only then that Jacob's spiritual mission was completed. Only when he said that. Now he is finished with his mission. And what we're going to read is not so much his mission from now on, it will be the mission of the children. That will be coming. But we have to understand what had happened to the children. You see, when Jacob, remember, comes to Esau, what was the first action that Jacob performed? What was the first thing he did? He bowed. He bowed before Esau 7 times. And his family bowed before Esau. Well, that is most of his family. You see, little Joseph, who was young at that point in time, was more worried about his mother Rachel than he was about Esau. And so he muscled up, so to speak. And only after a confrontation with Jacob did he bow down to Esau. So 11 of the brothers found themselves in a bent position. One brother did not bow because one brother wasn't here yet. That one brother was Benjamin. Do you remember Obadiah 1:18? Jacob was a fire. Who else was a fire? Joseph. Why does he say that? What is he actually thinking? What is he trying to get across? The message itself is clear. Joseph and his family, and Benjamin included, will be the instruments by which God defeats Esau. Now, we have evidence of this or practices of this. Let's think. In the story of the Exodus, when they finally had reached the promised land, who was the leader who led them in? It was Jacob. And what tribe was Jacob from? Ephraim. And Ephraim was whose son? Joseph. Later on, God, through Samuel, wanted to eliminate the Amalekites. Who did he send to kill the Amalekites? King Saul. And who was King Saul? He was a Benjamite. Let's go further. Persia. Persia is now ready to slay the Jewish people across the world. Not so much the king Ahasuerus, but his second in command, Haman the Agagite. Who defeated Haman and his sons? Mordecai and Esther. What tribe was Mordecai from? Benjamin. And Esther was his niece. In the last days, in the book of Zechariah, Gog and Magog, who will actually begin the process of slaying Gog and Magog? According to the writings, Joseph ben Mashiach. It will finish with David ben Mashiach. In our story then, I want to take another look in the book of Genesis, but I want to go back to the Genesis chapter 10 or chapter 9. Because you see, our story really started here. Now it started here in verse number 26. Well, let's go to 24. Now let's go up to 20. It begins by saying, Noah was a man of the earth, debased himself, and he planted a vineyard, and he drank the wine and became drunk, and he was uncovered in his tent. Ham, the son of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness. Okay, so Ham sees his father naked. But then it goes on to say, and he told his two brothers outside, and Shem and Japheth took the garment and put it upon their shoulders, and they walked backwards, and they covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned away, and they saw not their father's nakedness. Now Noah awoke from his wine and realized what his small son had done to him. and he said, "Cursed is Canaan." Who is his small son? That would be his grandson. So the event stirs around his grandson, Canaan. A slave of slaves shall he be to his brothers. We know that when Abraham comes into the land, what is going on is the land is being taken over, not by Shem's family, but by Ham's family and the Canaanites. But notice verse 26. And he said, blessed is Hashem, blessed is Hashem, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be slave to them. And may God extend Japhet, but he will dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be the slave to them. So we hear the picture of three sons. One son is placed in the bottom. That's through Ham and through Canaan. And Canaan was the one who caused the problems. But notice he goes to two, and he says Shem should be blessed, and so should Japhet, but his blessing should come inside the tent of Shem. Now, if we were to follow this story into chapter 10, we would go through all of the clans that were of these three boys. One clan will really stand out as you go through it, because his contribution to the world was probably greater than any other country. That was Yavan. Yavan was the tribe, the clan, that later would be known as the Greeks. And in modern times, Greek philosophy, the mathematics, the sciences, the philosophies, all of them came through the tribe of Yavan. Now, science is good, mathematics is good, philosophy is good. All of those things are good if they're found in the tent of Shem. And what does the tent of Shem offer us? Torah and God. So when we look at Yavan, we have to look at it in particular inside the tent of Shem. If it's outside the tent, if it's outside Torah, then we're going to have to look at it for a different reason and a different understanding. Now, the rabbis looked at the same word, Yavan, which is Yud, Vav, or Yud, Bet, and Nun, Safit, and they reversed the letters, which is what we would call abracadabra. Abracadabra would make it then Nun, Bet, and then again, the last letter would have been the, Yud. And the word would have been Novi, because you're taking out the vowels. There's no A's in there. You take out the vowels. Novi. A Novi is a strangler, one who chokes off. Yavan attempted to choke off Jacob's love of God. That same love was attempted to be choked off one more time and created for us the story of Hanukkah. You see, Hanukkah was more about the fact that Antiochus Epiphanes wasn't so much that he hated the Jews, he hated the one God idea. You see, by having only one God, then that meant that he couldn't be God. And so anytime he ran into somebody who dealt with one God, he was on the wrong side of his sword. We know that the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, eventually won the war. But one of the things that we don't understand or have very little understanding of is the fact that the Hasmoneans had as few as 1,000 people on their side. The rest of Israel had committed to assimilation. That is how close assimilation came. The same thing comes many other times, because you see, it's much easier to assimilate than it is to be separate. So Yavan brings with him the idea of oppression, of death. So as we're going through this, we're beginning to see that there is a dark period. That's the time in which Jacob is now finding himself. In fact, in 39, 30, 38, 39, 40 through 45, the Jews understand was the time of Jacob's trouble, the 70th week. Our story then is as much prophetic as it is about avoiding assimilation and about drawing from everything we can to help us become better at who we are. Now, the story in the Bible will not end until Rachel dies. You see, Rachel will end up dying in the land. Jacob will want to take her to bury her at Machpelah, but the problem is God says, no, I want you to bury her here at Bethel or Bethlehem. And so she is buried there. Now, why did God want to have her buried there? Well, according to the stories, Nebuchadnezzar, when he defeated the Jews and he began to move them out of the city, took them through Bethlehem and then down. So they walked past the grave of Rachel, and Rachel wept over her children, praying for their soon return, to which God honored at the 70th year. There's a lot of story I missed because there's so much in this story. But I wanted to give you an understanding that there's a lot of propheticness in this story, as well as the understanding of how to avoid assimilation, what we need to be doing.